Alright, so in our next lecture, we're going to dive into how artistic works actually come to life. How do they become works of art? And how do they capture the pure world of existence? This is what we'll be focusing on in the second lecture, and it's really at the heart of art philosophy. When it comes to art philosophy, we're not just talking about beauty for the sake of beauty. That's more of a traditional aesthetics thing. Instead, we're looking at how the discussion of beauty's essence naturally ties into the discussion of art. We're not separating the essence of beauty from human art. So, the path we're taking in this art philosophy course is all about focusing on artistic works. So, the big question we're tackling first is, how does something become a work of art? This is what we call the existence of the work problem. In other words, as we go through this second lecture, we're aiming to build an understanding that helps us tell the difference between artistic works and everything else. In art philosophy, we're only interested in talking about the real deal when it comes to artistic works. Strictly speaking, we're talking about real-life experiences here. You know how we often call the stuff written by different folks artistic works, even though some of it really isn't? Take Qiong Yao, died 2024, for example. She's penned a ton of novels, right? But a bunch of her later stuff isn't exactly high art, it's more like, well, craftwork. This really hit home for me. When Qiong Yao's novels first made their way to mainland China, I read one called On the Other Side, and it really got to me. I thought Qiong Yao was something special and wanted to read more of her work. But as I delved into more of her novels, I realized she was basically churning out the same old storylines. Her basic formula is crystal clear. What do you call it? Emotional debts. You've got Mr. Zhang falling for Ms. Li, but Li is head over heels for Mr. Wang. And wouldn't you know it, Wang is not into Li, but is all about Zhang. It's a never-ending cycle, you know? It's all about causing a whole lot of emotional turmoil and heartache. And before you know it, the readers are sucked into this emotional roller coaster, right? That's what we call emotional debts. Who owes what to whom, you know? After a while, I figured out that reading just one of her novels was enough to catch on to the same old pattern. Sure, we've got to give Qiong Yao props for her deep roots in Chinese literature. She's got a solid grasp of poetry, right? So, some of her lines and verses are really quite beautiful. That's something we've got to acknowledge. But here's the thing, it doesn't automatically mean that her works, once they're out there, become true works of art. You won't believe this, but there's this writer from Taiwan, Gao Yang, died 1992. Have you heard of him? He's a pro at writing historical novels. I got my hands on one of his called The Red Merchant. So, get this, I heard that Gao Yang is a total legend. He's churning out serialized novels for 3 different newspapers at the same time. Can you imagine that? 3 newspapers must be blowing up his phone every day. I can almost picture it, Gao Yang's sipping on a drink, and then one of the newspapers calls, "Hey, Mr. Gao Yang, we're waiting for your manuscript." And you know what he does? He puts down his glass, writes a section, and sends it over. Then he takes a few sips, and another boss calls, "You can send it to me, right?" We're waiting. We are twitching our fingers here. And then another call comes in. Juggling 3 newspapers at once, that's what I call novel creation. It's mind-blowing, but hey, it's doable. If you want to learn from him and pull off the same thing, first, you read 10 novels of a certain kind, okay? That way, you'll get the hang of it. There's a specific writing method, and then you can write 3 at the same time. You've already got the characters sorted for each novel, right? Their relationships are all mapped out, and you've already figured out their endings. They're all there, and your editor needs a section, right? I'll give you a section. I'll give you another section. And one more section for you. That's what I call craftwork, pure craftwork. I had this buddy back in our grad dorm who was a real character. He was majoring in journalism, but there was a stretch when he just wouldn't show up for class. I asked him, "Dude, why are you ditching class every single day?" And he goes, "I'm working on a novel." I'm like, "What kind of novel are you writing?" And he's all, "A martial arts novel." So I'm like, "Is there even a market for that?" And he's like, "Yeah, a publishing house has already reserved it." Man, I was blown away. I told him, "You've got some serious talent. Forget studying journalism theory, just focus on writing." Later on, he's like, "It's not that hard. I can show you how." I'm like, "How's that even possible?" And he's like, "If you read 10 martial arts novels, you'll know how to write one." So now I'm strapped for cash, and he tells me he's broke too. But applying for school financial aid? He's already got an advance on half of his royalties, so he's living the good life. When he's had enough of writing, he's like, "Let's go grab a drink." I'm like, "What about the money?" And he's like, "I've already been paid. It's all just a hustle, a craft hustle, nothing to it. You read 10 novels, and you're good to go. Just gotta study the writing style of martial arts novels, right?" There are different schools of thought. There's Qiong Yao's, right? What's it called? There are 4 heavy hitters, Liang Yusheng, and there's this dude called Gu Long. He's read them all. After reading 10, it all becomes clear. I'll use Gu Long's approach at one point, and then Qiong Yao's at another. It's all doable. What's so tough about that? But let's be real, this is a far cry from creating a true work of art, a whole different ball game. Oh, we're gonna have a whole lecture just on creating art pieces, their essence, and the process in the future. But for now, why are we diving into the content of the second lecture? I mean, how do we even tell the difference between art and craft? Where's that line? You make something and tell me it's art, go ahead and declare it. But nowadays, creating art seems like a whole different ball game. Like, someone hangs a men's urinal, right? And names it, Spring, work number X, oh boy. So, modern art, it's really throwing us for a loop. I mean, sculpture is sculpture, painting is painting, but where do we draw the line? If I slap a bunch of colors on a cat and let it roll on a canvas, what then? What's the work number? It's like modern art is challenging everything, even the philosophy of art. Every artist makes their own rules. They're like, "I am the art, you know? Oh, there's this sculptor in the US, he's a riot. He put his grandma in a wheelchair and wheeled her into an exhibition hall. What number is that work?" Pretty wild, huh? But we're still debating the philosophy of art, even with all the crazy stuff happening in modern art that's got us scratching our heads. But we still gotta ask, what does art mean in human life? Where does it fit in? So, all that talk we've been having? It's about the search for truth. And now we're wondering, how does a work actually exist as a work? When we break it down, there are 4 aspects to a work. The first one is the whole existence thing. That's the first thing to consider. Every work is an object, you can't argue with that. You can't just give me a bunch of pure ideas and call it a work, that's just not gonna fly. You throw a bunch of ideas at me and call it art? Then shoot, I guess I'm an artist too. I've written tons of philosophical papers, all full of ideas, but they're not physical objects, right? Sculpture is sculpture, you can move it, touch it, and stick it in a warehouse. Painting is painting, architecture just stands there, music comes alive when it's played or sung, and literature? That's an object too. Hey, don't think for a second that this is just a novel. What's its physical form, anyway? Is it the pages all bound together? Nah. We all know that literature is all about the language, so its physical form is just a bunch of words, strung together. And you can move it around, recite it in different places and times, you know. An old poem, a poem from another country, even us Chinese folks may recite it, move it around. Unless you see the words in literary works as just symbols of ideas, then it's not really a work, that's for sure. When I, Wang Defeng, write a paper, I'm using up words, but when a poet writes poetry, they're preserving those words. Let words be words, with all their emotional power. How do you really appreciate a poem, huh? You think just getting the gist of it means you've appreciated it? Nah, that's not enough. Let's take Du Fu's Climbing High, for example. It's all about the tough life of an old-time scholar in his later years, and that's the real deal. So, how can I claim to appreciate Climbing High? It's like Mission Impossible, right? To truly appreciate a poem, you gotta soak up every single word. The only way is to recite it or commit it to memory. That's when it really comes alive. When you read my paper, it's like you're burning the bridge after crossing the river. Hey! You get the point I'm making and the logical reasoning, and then you just toss away the words, right? If you're really appreciating someone's novel, prose, or poem, you're diving into their words, and you can't just toss them aside, can you? So, Heidegger really hit the nail on the head when he told us theorists to chill out with the articles and hang on to more words. It's all about safeguarding the words and cutting back on the articles. Later on, I realized I still have some guilt, not too heavy though, because I'm not much of a writer. Some folks are just pumping out content left and right. They're burning through words like there's no tomorrow. And then there's Heidegger, preaching about writing fewer articles and holding on to more words. What are words, you ask? What do they really mean when we use them? And what did Heidegger have to say about it? Well, he believed that words are at the very core of our existence on this planet. Language is the essence of our being, just like how clouds belong in the sky. Heidegger really nailed it when he said that language is the very essence of existence, and it finds its true home within language. When we immerse ourselves in language, we reach the deepest understanding. This is the fundamental power of giving words meaning. It's not about giving us a label to represent external things, but rather about capturing the essence of those things. We often think of language as a mere tool for communication, right? But no, it actually encapsulates our understanding of existence. Take the word water, for example. In English, it's water. When we see this word, what comes to mind? We might think of H2O, which is a concept. But what if we don't think of H2O? What do we think of then? We think of the connection of this thing to our existence. That's why a river can be called the Mother River. If you think about the sun as a space thing, it's just a big ball of fire, shining and doing some crazy nuclear stuff. So, that's the sun for you. But what did the sun mean to our ancestors back in the day? When we talk about the sun, we're talking about the source of life, brightness, and all that good stuff. And what's the deal with the moon? It's the Earth's sidekick, a space thing. We used to know it as the place where Qiong hangs out. But what does the moon really stand for? With all our fancy science, we use scientific methods to break things down. So, all the amazingness of sunlight gets broken down into what? Spectra. In science talk, it's all about spectra. So, what do you see when there's a big old rock in front of you? It's like some kind of god or something. You can study it with geology, give it a label. And how much does it weigh? Yeah, you can even crunch the numbers on that. But when we start talking about the rock all scientifically, it's like it just disappears, you know? It becomes this abstract idea, and you can't really feel the rock's presence. When do we come across rocks? Well, in architecture, for one. Take European architecture, for instance. You can see the color, its massive strength, and its solid presence. It's all about the visual impact. So, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the physical existence of the artwork. Basically, every piece of art is like an object in some way. But how do we wrap our heads around its physical existence? Well, according to traditional aesthetics, all artworks have a material foundation, so their physical existence is all about that foundation. Take a marble statue, for instance. What does the marble represent? It's the stuff that holds the shape of the sculpture, and the sculptor gives that shape to it, right? Now, this form needs to be added to a certain carrier, a material carrier, the material. We can totally use Aristotle's idea of form plus matter to figure this out. Every artwork has a material side to it. But it's still not a complete artwork at this point, it's just a bunch of possibilities. Then, for example, the sculptor adds the form to it. The form is added onto the material, and that's what we call form plus matter. Alright, so we've figured out the second aspect of artwork. Every piece of art has its own look and feel, you know, its form. But just having the form isn't the whole deal, and adding material to the mix still doesn't make it art. Well, except for a bunch of modern art pieces that don't really have anything to do with real life. When we look at art history, we see a ton of artworks, and most of them have some real stuff going on, right? Like, have you seen the Venus de Milo? She's the goddess Venus, so that's some real content, isn't it? But, you know, it's all from mythology, which is totally cool. In a nutshell, when we think about writing a novel, we're talking about creating characters and storylines. And when it comes to real-life content, Dream of the Red Chamber is like a one-stop shop for old Chinese society. It's got everything, from architecture, clothing, and food to traditional Chinese medicine and even art. It's like a treasure trove that gives us a peek into the amazing civilization of ancient China, covering pretty much everything except military stuff. It also dives into politics, government, and money matters. So, by reading Dream of the Red Chamber, you can really get a feel for what life was like back in ancient China. It even touches on metaphysics, and I was blown away by how accurately Cao Shuoqin, 18th century CE, used traditional Chinese metaphysics methods to analyze the characters' fates. It's not just something he made up on the spot. He really knew his stuff. And when it comes to poetry and literary theory, there's a whole bunch of artistic and literary ideas and critiques woven into the characters' conversations, like Bao Chai and Dayu. So, you see, Dream of the Red Chamber is packed with real-life content, right? I mean, apart from abstract art, traditional Chinese paintings, like landscapes, still life, and portraits, all capture real-life stuff. So, that's another big part of what makes this work so essential. So, there's one more thing, we always say this work is complete, right? It's a whole. You can't break it down, so how does the entirety of this work come together? It's by having a central theme, which has always been a topic of discussion regarding the work. For example, what's the main idea of Dream of the Red Chamber? Mr. Lu Xun, died 1936, has talked about this too. He said, there have been too many discussions about this Dream of the Red Chamber, and the debate is ongoing, known as readology. Who is the author, who wrote the sequel, let's not discuss for now. Later it was finally clarified, it must have been written by Cao Shuoqin. As for the last 40 chapters, who wrote them? Now it has become a problem again. Originally, it was thought to be Gao 19th century CE, right? Now it is said that it is not Gao. So, what about the new edition of Dream of the Red Chamber published by People's Literature Publishing House? The author's name is signed as Chao Shuachin and an anonymous person, and this has raised questions again. So, who is the author? Let's not discuss the author and the sequel writer for now. Mr. Lu Xun continued, just the theme. If we discuss the theme of this novel, there are various interpretations due to different perspectives. Confucian scholars see the ideas of the Book of Changes, Taoist scholars see it as simply a pornographic novel, literati see it as romantic, that is, young readers see it as a love story, revolutionaries see it as anti-Qing and pro-Ming. This revolutionary is referring to Tsai Yuanpei, died 1940. Tsai Yuanpei published a book on the study of Dream of the Red Chamber called A Stone's Index. What was the conclusion? A novel against the Qing dynasty and in favor of the Ming dynasty. Ah! This is the theme of Dream as determined by Tsai Yuanpei. There are also rumor-mongers. Rumor-mongers see palace intrigues, that is readology. It is said that the characters in a novel actually have real-life prototypes, and their names are hidden, right? What does a novel actually reveal? Palace intrigues, the inner workings of the court, the political intrigues of the Qing dynasty at that time, and so on. This is called old readology, indexed readology. Mr. Lu Xun dismissed them all as rumor-mongers, peeping into palace intrigues. Later, I found a new rumor-monger. His name is Liu Xinwu. Have you heard of him? He talked about Dream on the TV show, 100 Lectures, and now he has also made some speculations, right? I saw it, a new rumor-monger has emerged. So, what Mr. Lu Xun said is interesting. What is the theme of Dream of the Red Chamber? It is still being debated. Everyone has their own views, because of the perspectives of the readers. You say young people see it as a love story, so it's a romance novel. Rumor-mongers see what? An allusion to the political intrigues of the Qing dynasty, right? It's another perspective. When you talk about an art piece, it always has a main idea behind it. Take music, for example. Sometimes this idea can be put into words, using a literary concept, and then it gets a title. But you know, music is quite interesting, especially instrumental pieces. They often don't have a title, but they still have a theme, right? For instance, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony was later named what? The Fate Symphony. So, fate is its theme. And the Sixth Symphony is called the Pastoral Symphony, so the theme is pastoral. When it comes to art, whether it's from the past or the modern era, there are 4 key aspects that need to be considered. The artwork has to physically exist and take on a specific form that appeals to our senses. It should incorporate content from real life and convey a significant theme. Only when these 4 elements come together can we truly call it an artistic work. But here's the thing, just having these 4 elements doesn't automatically make something an artistic work. In the past, discussions on art often focused solely on these aspects, as if they could be considered separately. This approach in traditional aesthetics is a mistake. Simply having all 4 aspects doesn't guarantee that something is an artistic work. Unless we take a broad view and consider a well-crafted work to be art, it may not qualify as a true artistic creation. For instance, a successful documentary could be seen as an art piece, but it doesn't necessarily make it a genuine work of art. In this art philosophy discussion, we're not really debating whether a documentary can be seen as a piece of art when we're strictly talking about artistic works. I mean, a documentary definitely exists on the screen. You've got the whole play of light and shadow going on. It's got its own structure and, of course, it's gotta have real-life content, otherwise, it wouldn't even be a documentary. So, a documentary has to have its own theme, right? Like, in China, there was this documentary called The Story of the Yangtze River that aired on TV at some point. It was totally a documentary, and its theme was crystal clear. So, you could say that this documentary was a big hit and had some serious artistic value. It's cool to use the word art to describe its value. But, if we're being super strict, it's not really a true work of art. Some folks who are really into documentaries might not agree with me. I've had students ask me this question in class before. Should we kick documentaries out of the art category? I told them, if we use the word art in a broad sense, there are all kinds of other arts, like management art, leadership art, and even military art, right? In everyday talk, we don't need to be so uptight about it. What we're really focused on is the existence of a work as a work. So, that brings up the first question. When can we call something a work of art? Alright, let's keep talking about it. These four aspects aren't separate and then just come together to make a work of art. It's not that simple.